we're not just talking about whether or not someone is living a righteous life, right, or a virtuous life, like we discussed in ethics. We're not just talking about whether or not someone is happy. Okay, so those are, we could imagine someone who's happy, but maybe doesn't have a meaningful life, right? Or maybe there's even a sense in which someone might be able to have a meaningful life even though they're not happy. Could we maybe think of an example like that? Can any of you think of an example of someone whose life you thought was meaningful in some sort of objective way, even though they were not happy? Oh, Maria, I'm sorry. Yes, our parents. Yes. My parents have not historically been the happiest individuals. Depression runs in the family for sure. But yeah, right? We want to say our parents' lives have meaning. Good. Anyone else? Any historical figures we can think of? Any famous people that you know of who were historically unhappy, yet their lives were obviously significant and meaningful given their place in history? Yeah, lots of famous authors, artists, right? Was it Van Gogh who, almost took his ear off? Right? Number of famous writers, especially, right, committed suicide. Same with musicians. Yeah, right. So there again, we don't just want to associate it with joy, right? Even though hopefully there we want joy to be part of a meaningful life. But again, these things can be separate. Okay. So even if you're thinking of some sort of ideal, we're specifically talking about the significance, the final end, which a person ought to seek in order to have a meaningful life. Right. And so we want to ask ourselves these questions again. They come up a lot. It can come up especially in times of loss, right? If you've lost someone close to you, or if you're facing your own mortality, right? I don't know if any of you, in philosophy, I tend to have a lot of friends who are much older than me, right? Much closer to the ends of their lives, right? And so these existentialist questions, right, become very important because most of their life has behind them, right? And so they're reflecting back on it and trying to garner some significance, right? To frame some meaning for it. We also might ask ourselves about the impact of external forces, right, on our life and whether or not they have meaning, right? Especially in times like we're facing now with so many instances of global conflict and warfare and again, going back to philosophy of religion and the problem of evil, so much what seems like completely unnecessary suffering, right? We might ask ourselves, why? What is the point of all of this, right? What is the meaning of life? Such that we can point to it and say, that is why we ought to stay alive. That's why people ought not commit suicide, right? That's why we ought not murder each other, right? That's why we ought to value and take care of one another. Why? What is the significance of life, right? That makes all of those other things moral imperatives, right? Or the right thing to do. Okay, so that's what we're seeking this, what will be next week, but what we're going to be talking about today. And so just to start you off, I maybe should have done a trigger warning. I apologize. I've already mentioned suicide, but self-harm, obviously, is discussed right away. And I didn't mean to be so cavalier about it. I don't mean to take it lightly. It is a significant topic, but it's one that is exactly related to the topic at hand. And so it's something that Albert Camus, right, one of the philosophers that you're going to be reading about next week, starts right off the bat, right? He says, there is but one truly serious philosophical problem, and that is suicide. Judging whether life is or is not worth living amounts to answering the fundamental question of philosophy. All the rest, whether or not the world has 3 dimensions, right, metaphysics, whether the mind has 9 or 12 categories, some more metaphysics maybe related to some epistemology, comes afterwards. These are games. One must first answer the fundamental question, right? So just why keep living? Right? That is what he thinks is the fundamental question here. Okay, so in response to those questions, right? We're going to have a lot of different responses. And so there's a lot of nuance here that I'm not going to get to go over in great detail, but I am going to go over, let me take a screenshot of this for you. This nice little chart. So we'll get a sense of the various options that are going to be available to us in terms of answering this question. And again, philosophy, lots of options for you to choose from. No indications from me as to which one is the right one. So asking these big questions, getting lots of possible answers, but hopefully there's something in here, again, from which you're able to glean some significance. But to get a sense of why we might ask this question, right? Some people might think it's really obvious. Do any of you think that the meaning of life is like really obvious, and why are we asking this question? Anyone? I think like it's very clear, the value of life. Nobody? All right, so maybe we're feeling, oh, let's see, I think it's entirely subjective. Okay. All right. So then it wouldn't be clear, right? It's subjective because some people wouldn't have that sense. Okay, so in case anyone is wondering, maybe you're just not comfortable sharing it out loud, but in case anyone is wondering why we might be inclined to answer this question, or why might some philosopher think this is the fundamental question, right? The thing that we should be asking ourselves.